My name is Phil DiCollegiero. I'm the chairman of the Board of Selectmen here in North Andover.
I'm Holly. You met me this morning. Welcome back.
So Holly's on our school committee,
Yep.
and Holly and I are both elected to 5-member boards that oversee part of North Andover's town government. So myself and 4 other people serve on the Board of Selectmen, and we are the executive board that oversees the town manager. Now, everybody got to meet the town manager this morning, right? And he talked a lot about what's happening in town, and so we are the board that oversees him, and we make up a certain branch of town government. Now, you guys have been working with your social studies departments about different branches of government at the federal level. You have the executive, the judicial branch. Does anybody know what, on the local level, the Board of Selectmen and town manager represent together? So a lot of people think that because there are many of us. But the funny thing about towns like North Andover is that the 5 of us and the town manager together, we make up the executive branch. And then the legislative branch in North Andover, you might be able to guess what that is. You actually may not. But you heard from the town moderator earlier today. And what does the town moderator oversee?
Town meeting?
Town meeting. And town meeting meets once a year. It can be any resident in North Andover that goes to express their thoughts and vote. And that once a year meeting, that's our legislative branch. At the federal level, what's the legislative branch? Congress. So, and that's exactly it. So the town voters at town meeting every year represent the same type or same branch of our local government that Congress does in Washington, D.C. And so each year we work, not each year, every day we work together, school committee members and the Board of Selectmen. Because the Board of Selectmen oversees about half of town government. We have the police department, fire department, DPW, all that fall under the town manager and the Board of Selectmen. While the other half of town government, believe it or not, is entirely what department?
What's the other half of the budget?
Schools. And so a lot of times Holly and myself and the 4 other people that are on each of our boards and Dr. Price and the town manager work together to try and prioritize how we spend money, because we all get the same pot of money to divvy up, and put those resources towards different things like paving roads and hiring police officers and hiring teachers or buying textbooks. And so that's why we're here today, to talk to you a little bit more about what happens at the local level and kind of answer your questions, because you guys had a chance to hear a lot from what happens with the town manager and the superintendent. We were hoping that maybe now that you had a chance to digest that, maybe if you had any questions, we could make this more of a question and answer, or maybe there's more information that you guys want to collect before you ask questions. A lot of times it can be confusing, right? What does the Board of Selectmen and town side cover? What does the school side cover? For instance, how many people think the school department runs the youth center? No, start talking. We want them to start talking.
Yeah.
Start talking to you, not to each other, as a good audience should do.
Who runs the youth center? Which side? Do you think it's the Board of Selectmen that it falls under, or the school committee?
Board of Selectmen?
Board of Selectmen.
What about the sidewalks in town? If you're walking to school and you see a sidewalk that's in disrepair, would you go to the school committee or the Board of Selectmen?
Committee.
Think about it.
Board of Selectmen.
Why?
Because it's not part of the school to have the situation about it, but it's about.
It's on town property.
And it's about.
What about playgrounds?
Like, what about the playground, the drama field, they just rebuilt the whole playground.
They did.
Yeah, right next to the Civics
So who do you think did that? Schools or town side?
town.
Town. What about
Boring and all.
what about we just did a bunch of playgrounds like the Kittredge
Kittredge.
School across the street? Town or schools?
Hand up over there. Yep. Good.
Yep.
What about this? We talked a little bit this morning about the big athletic field complex that's going to go on right behind the school here. Is that school committee or Board of Selectmen purview?
School committee? Part of it.
Why?
Because it's behind the school, but it's not like a part of the school.
Up until a few weeks ago, part of it was on school property.
And so we had to go through a funny thing where, I know this sounds silly, right? Because we're all North Andover. We had to go to town meeting, and part of the discussion was the voters, everybody at that town meeting, the legislative branch, had to decide, do we want to move forward with developing that property and identifying a certain chunk of it as being town-owned so that the town, but not the school side, could go and develop it so that it could have walking trails, athletic fields, extra playgrounds that they're going to put in, so that way everybody in town could use it.
But before we even got to the town meeting part, the town manager came to the school committee to ask for our vote of support for that. So that's one way that we work together so that he could go to town meeting and say, we have full support for this from the boards in town.
So he went, he
Yep.
spoke to Holly, he spoke to the other 4 school committee members and said yay or nay, and thankfully you said yay. How about you? So you guys were just at lunch earlier. How many of you threw out like half-eaten sandwiches or pieces of fruit? How many of you threw out more than just like plastic trash and wrappers?
A couple honest people.
That's stored in a tray.
So this is an example of how our town and school department just worked together, for instance, last night. So the Board of Selectmen appoints a group of volunteers in town called the Sustainability Committee. They came into these volunteers, these people who live in our town but don't get paid, they came into our schools back in March to look at how many students throw away things that could be composted. So who knows what compost is? Who wants to explain it?
It's like that hippie thing where you like throw like like pieces of like fruit that you didn't eat and it like goes into the ground or something and it's beneficial somehow.
It rots and it becomes dirt. So rather than it going into a trash truck or filling up a trash bag, it goes and becomes dirt that can be used more productively. And so what this group found out is that when they were in the elementary schools, they could take that material that could be composted and not thrown in the trash. If they took all of that material out of the trash barrels, that they would have 1/10 the number of trash bags going into a dumpster. And so this group of volunteers applied for a grant at the state level, or they're applying for a grant. They want tens of thousands of dollars from the state so that we can make this happen in North Andover, where students at all the different schools can take that material out of the trash stream, which ends up being better for the environment. So this town board went, they did the research, they put this grant application together, but it's for the schools. So they went last night to see Holly and her 4 colleagues. And what happened?
She gave a great presentation on her findings and the pilot program you did both here and at Thompson, and asked for the school committee to sign off on, because part of the grant application required the school committee's approval, the chair's signature, to go forward and apply for this grant. So we were very impressed and we approved it.
So the school said yes. So now that means it comes back to that committee. They're gonna go apply for that grant at the state. And if we get that grant, then that money that this town committee applied for, that the board appointed, will then go and be able to be put to use in our school department. And so it's an example of, it sounds silly, we're all the same town, but we all have these different responsibilities and we all seem to really do a good job of working together so that we can make things just a little bit better for everybody who we're supposed to serve.
If you wanted to advocate for something, either in town or in the schools, could you go to a selectman or school committee meeting and present your idea or your cause?
You allowed to do that?
Yes.
Who said no? Why no? Why don't you think that you could? That's okay. So who said yes? You want to give somebody? Go. Why do you think yes?
Well, freedom of speech.
Yeah. We're supposed to serve you. We're elected to serve you. And so when we meet, and we both meet every other week at different times, so you could go to both of our meetings, there's a section where you could go up and you could speak about anything. Or you could contact us ahead of time and say, I'd like to talk about a certain topic. And so that actually happened. How many people in here pay attention to what's happening like in Washington, D.C. with Democrats and Republicans and kind of like the anger that's happening? A lot of you guys. Do you talk about it in class? Did you talk about how, like in Charlottesville, for instance, there were people that really didn't show their best
That happened
sides?
kind of over the summer, but we did talk about some of the student protests in Florida.
Okay.
In response to, and a lot of the kids really got, they really thought the speeches were powerful, and I was saying, and you both would probably agree with me, that this generation is probably going to be, one of the first generations, maybe since their grandparents, that are very outspoken and speak their mind. So that's a conversation we definitely have had in the past 4 months, and I've been very impressed with what the kids have to say.
I heard a little bit this morning.
We had, so this goes back to what happened with us as a Board of Selectmen. We had a group of students at the high school, so not too much older than you guys, who said that they were really upset, they were bothered by what seems to be happening nationally with the conversation about race and religion. And so we actually had a group that reached out to the Board of Selectmen and said, hey, can we come to a meeting and talk about something that we want to do? And so Caitlin Park's from the high school, so she's a junior at the high school. Her and a group of her classmates came to a selectmen's meeting. They sat in front of us and presented this whole idea of what's called a Race Amity Day. And it was going to be something that they asked that we as a board recognize for June 10th, where they put together a whole program to help people understand in North Andover the different cultures that make up all the people who live in our town, whether it's your religion or your ethnic background. And so, Caitlin, you're actually doing that. It's this Sunday, right?
Can we give her a plug? Caitlin, why don't you, can we give her a plug?
You're on TV right now.
absolutely.
Push it, push it.
What it is
Let's
about.
listen to Caitlin, former student. She has a plug, a fun event that some of you might want to go to. So you got to submit it. Take advantage.
So Race Amity Day is happening on Sunday from 10 to 12 at North Andover High School. And it's basically to promote inclusion and celebrating all the different cultures and ethnicities in our community. So there's going to be food, dancing, crafts, and we hope to start a discussion and to promote this celebration of cultures.
That's
so
awesome.
cool. That's
That's
so
good
awesome.
because we obviously need that.
So even though it's happening at the school, she needed Board of Selectmen approval to make it an official day.
She wanted, so you can do, you could do it if you wanted to, but
Oh,
she
you
wanted,
need it?
Caitlin wanted it
Okay.
to be a North Andover day, and that's why she
It's
came
for
to the
whole
board.
town, not just
Yep.
the school.
And that was
Okay.
why, because she wanted it to not just be a school thing, so she asked the board,
Okay.
not for permission, but to help declare it that day. And so that's an example of a really little thing that the board could do that could help support something that's really important to a lot of people. And so Caitlin wasn't told no. She came to a meeting, she asked if she could speak. We got her on our agenda, and she got to speak publicly in front of an audience and on TV, and people got to learn more about this neat idea, and you got to plug it even again.
So student-generated things like that, and to be honest with you, Caitlin kind of pestered me to get Diana to come and talk to my students, which was the beginning of Civics Day. So Civics Day is actually originated from a student. Things coming and generated from students, it's pretty awesome. And all of you can do that wherever you go to high school next year. You have an opportunity to do that.
How old do you have to be to vote? So, believe it or not, in North Andover, there were a group of students 3 years ago that came to the Board of Selectmen and said, we want you to drop the age to 16 so that students could vote in town elections, not for president, not for Congress or Senate, but for town people like
town
myself and
meeting.
Holly. And that they could go and participate in town meeting. And so they came to the Board of Selectmen and asked to have that put on the agenda of town meeting, because town meeting, our legislative branch would have to pass it. And they wanted it to go so that students, because all of you guys right now, you're sitting in a building that the town funds and that we manage, but you're the ones that are impacted the most. And their thought was, since they're so impacted by what the town does, they should get a say. And even though Caitlin got to have a say, even though she's not a voter, they wanted to be able to vote. They wanted to go to town meeting and make sure that the town listened truly to what they wanted. And so they came to the Board of Selectmen. They asked if the board would support them. Unfortunately, most of the board did not support them, but they still got to go to town meeting, and there was this big debate about whether or not 16 and 17-year-olds should be allowed to vote, like for people like me and Holly and for our school budgets. And the town voted, and the town didn't end up voting for it, but there was a lot of interesting discussion. A lot of students got up there to speak because they thought it was so important that they have a say.
Do you guys have any questions for us?
Questions about what they do, questions about things or changes that you might like to see in North Andover, whether it be things at the youth center, things you get, fields, different things that you guys have. How many people here are members of the youth center? That's it? That's all we have? How many people have ever gone to youth center dance? So that, believe it or not, is generated from the budget that they're involved in.
Do you think the youth center, I think I asked this already,
No, not this group, you didn't.
didn't use that town side, so the selectmen, or school side with the school committee? Town side. So you guys, not many hands went up, but I remember in 6th grade, a lot of 6th graders go to the youth center, but not many hands just went up. And I know this is 8th graders, so do you guys, how come you don't go to the youth center? Great.
I want to see career or anything, but you know, it's just not for me. There's not enough activities that suit my interests.
Okay.
Is it sports heavy, you think, Lindsay?
Like, it's just not like a whole lot for me. Like, I can't play basketball. I'm not good at sports at all.
So Lindsay, you could email Rick Gorman, and I know students at the high school who have contacted Rick, and he's a pretty open guy to hear. That's another thing that.
What would you like to see at the youth center?
I'm not really sure, but
Rock concerts.
sweet. I'm up for that.
What do you think about
The
it?
reason I don't go is right here.
Too much schoolwork?
There's just so much more to do at home. It's
Video games, right?
So did you hear what he said? He said he has so much more schoolwork he feels like he can't go to do stuff
No, I
there.
think video games is what he's talking about, right?
He's talking about video games.
Video
Oh.
games is what he's talking about.
Oh. Never mind. He has other fun things to do.
So here's the deal. Excuse me, this is not a free-for-all. One question at a time, one response. I really appreciate, and the speakers represent this dialogue that we're having. So I'm gonna let them call on the next group of questioners, okay? Great.
Matt said his hand up.
So I think that when you enter 6th grade, you don't have as much work as you do when you're in 8th grade, and priority of sports starts to pick up a little bit more because a lot of kids now start to play like club sports, so they don't have as much time to go over to the youth center and so forth. So that's why you see the interest in 6th grade slowly drop as you go to 8th grade.
Okay.
There's a lot of schoolwork now, like tons of homework. Okay, people do.
So can't you do homework there? Don't they have a homework room there?
They do.
Oh, Miss Starman, you should have more faith in our students.
All right, so guys and girls, we got a few more questions. Let them address this, and then we'll go on.
So like this is an example. We talked with the last group, for instance. Like we talked before about how there were students that wanted to have the right to vote because they didn't feel like they had as much of a say as they should because of how much the town impacts them. And even though you guys wouldn't be covered because you're not 16 yet, that wasn't successful anyways. Holly and I are here because we're curious. We want to know, what do you want to see us doing in town, whether it's in our schools or maybe it's things like the youth center, which aren't school related but affect your lives. So there's a lot of things that we do and a lot of money we spend as a community to try to make your lives better. Are we doing a good job?
You had your hand up. Did you have a question? Or
I was going to talk about the youth center. I have in past, but I barely go there anymore because there's really nothing to do there. Because by the time that I get there, because I don't take a bus, there's nothing to do because usually kids upstairs have already taken the gaming thing. I don't want to play like score because I don't want to. But there's really nothing else to do other than those two things. There's
so not enough variety?
It's not as fun.
Okay.
An idea for the youth center. Maybe have like student-ran clubs, because we can't really have clubs in the middle school like at the high school. Like at the high school, I feel like they have more clubs there.
There's like
Maybe-
30 clubs at the high school.
Yeah, but at the middle school, we really have like one club that I know of. So
That's an
maybe
excellent idea.
Maybe at the youth center, we can have like student-ran clubs.
Did you guys hear what she said? So she
That's
thought
an excellent idea.
she thought a good idea would be, because at the high school they have so many student-run clubs, but at the middle school they don't. So one way the youth center could be more impactful is having more
Provide
student-run
space
clubs.
for clubs.
Is that a good idea? I mean, I like that idea.
Me too.
I have a book club.
Go.
I'm new this year, so I,
She's new. She's from a different. She's new to North Andover.
Okay.
I'm from Wakefield, so I had the Boys and Girls Club. So I made my own club called the Animal Club.
Okay.
I made my own club up in all school. And I used to be like the staff of them.
So student-generated clubs.
And you did that at the Boys and Girls Center? Okay.
That might be something that I think, like, so here's an example, like, you guys all met with us today. I think that's an idea that we could take back to the youth center and say, how can
You
we
guys
encourage?
generated an idea right here, right now, to bring to the Board of Selectmen. I think it's pretty cool. So
You have an
we probably
idea?
have time for maybe one or two more questions. about anything, things that have come up, anything that you guys would like to talk about? Maya, do you have a question? Okay, so we're gonna listen.
Clear, Maya.
Okay, are you required to be present for every town meeting?
No,
No.
no one is required to be present. Which is why, so it's funny, North Andover, how many people live in North Andover? Let's go, you in the back, you haven't spoken. Purple shirt. Purplish, I don't know. How many people do you think live in North Andover?
1 million?
So yeah, it's actually, it's just under 30,000 people, so he said 28,000. So that means we have about 20,000 voters. How many people do you think go every year to town meeting?
Not enough.
If every voter could go to town meeting, Harrington. No. Stephanie's son. No. So yeah, we have about 350, 400 on a normal year that go to a town meeting, maybe 500. This past January we had a special town meeting where we had 3,000 people go, but that's still out of 20,000 people that could go. So no, you don't have to go to every town meeting. You don't have to go to any town meeting. But if you don't go to a town meeting, your voice doesn't get heard. You don't have to speak if you go, but you don't get to have a say.
And when you do go, like we said this morning, you're helping to make laws for the town.
So,
Pretty important.
I think this was a great session. Can you give the speakers a round of applause? Excuse me. So just so you know, both our speakers, believe it or not, this is their first time in Civics Day, and I'd love to invite them back next year, and I think them wanting to come back next year is based upon the quality of questions and the discussion we had, which was great. So let's just listen, because we're going to do this in an orderly fashion.